This does not mean that a body of English gentlemen will wish to be presided over by a rogue. What it does mean is that they will come to desire a speaker who is not a judge but is an honest partisan. The Parliament Act is a menace to the judicial character of the Speaker. In the Congress of the United States, the Speaker of the House of Representatives is a man of character and of vigour, but he is an avowed partisan, and may almost be called the parliamentary leader of the party which is supported by a majority in the House of Representatives. Second question. What is the general tendency of these new conventions? Answer. It assuredly is to increase the power of any party which possesses a parliamentary majority, i.e. a majority, however got together, of the House of Commons, and finally, to place the control of legislation, and indeed the whole government of the country, in the hands of the Cabinet, which is in England at once the only instrument through which a dominant party can exercise its power, and the only body in the state which can lead and control the parliamentary majority of which the Cabinet is the organ. That the rigidity and the strength of the party system, or, to use an American expression, of the machine, has continued with every successive generation to increase in England, is the conviction of the men who have most thoroughly analysed English political institutions as they now exist and work. Almost everything tends in one and the same direction. The leaders in Parliament each now control their own party mechanism. At any given moment, the actual Cabinet consists of the men who lead the party which holds office. The leading members of the opposition lead the party which wishes to obtain office. Party warfare in England is, in short, conducted by leading parliamentarians who constitute the actual Cabinet or the expected Cabinet. The electors, indeed, are nominally supreme. They can, at a general election, transfer the government of the country from one party to another. It may be maintained with much plausibility that under the quinquennial Parliament created by the Parliament Act, the British electorate will each 5 years do little else than elect the party or the Premier by whom the country shall be governed for 5 years. In Parliament, a Cabinet, which can command a steadfast, even though not a very large majority, finds little check upon its powers. A greater number of MPs than 50 years ago deliver speeches in the House of Commons, but in spite of, or perhaps because of this facile eloquence, the authority of individual MPs who neither sit in the Cabinet nor lead the opposition has suffered diminution. During the Palmerstonian era, at any rate, a few of such men each possessed an authority inside and outside the House which is hardly claimed by any member nowadays who neither has nor is expected to obtain a seat in any Cabinet. Any observer whose political recollections stretch back to the time of the Crimean War, that is 60 years ago, will remember occasions in which the words of Roebuck, of Roundell Palmer, of Cobden, and above all, at certain crises of Bright, might be, and indeed were, of a weight which no government, or for that matter no opposition, could treat as a trifle. Legislation again is now the business, one might almost say the exclusive business, of the Cabinet. Few, if any, as far as an outsider can judge, are the occasions on which a private member not supported by the Ministry of the day can carry any bill through Parliament. Any MP may address the House, but the Prime Minister can greatly curtail the opportunity for discussing legislation when he deems discussion inopportune. The spectacle of the House of Commons, which neither claims nor practices real freedom of discussion, and has no assured means of obtaining from a ministry in power answers to questions which vitally concern the interest of the nation, is not precisely from a constitutional point of view edifying or reassuring, but the plain truth is that the power which has fallen into the hands of the Cabinet may be all but necessary for the conduct of popular government in England under our existing constitution. There exists cause for uneasiness. It is at least arguable that important changes in the conventions, if not in the law, of the Constitution may be urgently needed, but the reason for alarm is not that the English executive is too strong, for weak government generally means bad administration, but that our English executive is, as a general rule, becoming more and more the representative of a party rather than the guide of the country. No fair-minded man will, especially at this moment, dispute that the passion for national independence may transform a government of partisans into a government bent on securing the honour and the safety of the nation. But this fact, though it is of immense moment, ought not to conceal from us the inherent tendency of the party system to confer upon partisanship authority which ought to be the exclusive property of the nation. Third question. Does the experience of the last 30 years confirm the doctrine laid down in this treatise that the sanction which enforces obedience to the conventions of the Constitution is to be found in the close connection between these conventions and the rule of law? Answer. The doctrine I have maintained may be thus at once illustrated and explained. The reason why every Parliament keeps in force the Mutiny Act, or why a year never elapses without a Parliament being summoned to Westminster, is simply that any neglect of these conventional rules would entail upon every person in office the risk, we might say the necessity, of breaking the law of the land. If the law governing the army, which is in effect an annual act, were not passed annually, the discipline of the army would without constant breaches of law become impossible. If a year were to elapse without a Parliament being summoned to Westminster, a good number of taxes would cease to be paid, and it would be impossible legally to deal with such parts of the revenue as were paid into the imperial exchequer. Now, it so happens that recent experience fully shows the inconvenience and danger of either violating a constitutional convention or of breaking the law because custom had authorised a course of action which rested on no legal basis. The House of Lords, in order to compel a dissolution of Parliament in 1909, rejected the budget. Their lordships acted within what was then their legal right, yet they caused thereby great inconvenience, which, however, was remedied by the election of a new Parliament. For years the income tax had been collected in virtue not of an act, but of a resolution of the House of Commons passed long before the income tax for the coming year came into existence. An ingenious person wishing to place difficulties in the way of the government's proceedings claimed repayment of the sum already deducted by the Bank of England from such part of his income as was paid to him through the bank. The bold plaintiff at once recovered the amount of a tax levied without legal authority. No better demonstration of the power of the rule of law could be found than is given by the triumph of Mr. Gibson Bowles. Development during the last 30 years of new constitutional ideas. These ideas are 1. Woman suffrage, 2. Proportional representation, 3. Federalism, 4. The referendum. 2 general observations. The brief criticism of each of these new ideas which alone in this introduction it is possible to give will be facilitated by attending to 2 general observations which apply more or less to each of the 4 proposed reforms or innovations. First observation. Political inventiveness has in general fallen far short of the originality displayed in other fields than politics by the citizens of progressive or civilized states. The immense importance attached by modern thinkers to representative government is partly accounted for by its being almost the sole constitutional discovery or invention unknown to the citizens of Athens or of Rome. It is well also to note that neither representative government nor Roman imperialism, nor indeed most of the important constitutional changes which the world has witnessed, can be strictly described as an invention or a discovery. When they did not result from imitation, they have generally grown rather than been made. Each was the production of men who were not aiming at giving effect to any novel political ideal, but were trying to meet in practice the difficulties and wants of their time. In no part of English history is the tardy development of new constitutional ideas more noteworthy or more paradoxical than during the whole Victorian era, 1837 to 1902. It was an age full of intellectual activity and achievement. It was an age rich in works of imagination and of science. It was an age which extended in every direction the field of historical knowledge, but it was an age which added little to the world's scanty store of political or constitutional ideas. The same remark in one sense applies to the years which have passed since the opening of the 20th century. What I have ventured to term new constitutional ideas are for the most part not original. Their novelty consists in the new interest which during the last 14 years they have come to command. Second observation. These new ideas take very little, one might almost say no, account of one of the ends which good legislation ought, if possible, to attain, but this observation requires explanatory comment. Under every form of popular government, and certainly under the more or less democratic constitution now existing in England, legislation must always aim at the attainment of at least 2 different ends which, though both of importance, are entirely distinct from one another. One of these ends is the passing or the maintaining of good or wise laws, that is, laws which, if carried out, would really promote the happiness or welfare of a given country, and therefore which are desirable in themselves and are in conformity with the nature of things. That such legislation is a thing to be desired, no sane man can dispute. If, for example, the freedom of trade facilitates the acquisition of good and cheap food by the people of England, and does not produce any grave counterbalancing evil, no man of ordinary sense would deny that the repeal of the Corn Laws was an act of wise legislation. If vaccination banishes smallpox from the country and does not produce any tremendous counterbalancing evil, the public opinion even of Leicester would hold that a law enforcing vaccination is a wise law. The second of these 2 different ends is to ensure that no law should be passed or maintained in a given country, e.g. in England, which is condemned by the public opinion of the English people. That this, where possible, is desirable will be admitted by every thoughtful man. A law utterly opposed to the wishes and feelings entertained by the inhabitants of a country, a rule which everyone dislikes and no one will obey, is a nullity, or in truth no law at all, and even in cases where, owing to the power of the monarch who enacts a law opposed to the wishes of his subjects, such a law can to a certain extent be enforced, the evils of the enforcement may far overbalance the good effects of legislation in itself wise. This thought fully justifies an English government in tolerating throughout India institutions, such as caste, supported by Indian opinion though condemned by the public opinion, and probably by the wise opinion of England. The same line of thought explained, palliated, and may even have justified the hesitation of English statesmen to prohibit suttee. Most persons, then, will acknowledge that sound legislation should be in conformity with the nature of things, or, to express the matter shortly, be wise, and also be in conformity with the demands of public opinion, or in other words, be popular, or at any rate not unpopular. But there are few Englishmen who sufficiently realise that both of these 2 ends cannot always be attained, and that it very rarely happens that they are each equally attainable. Yet the history of English legislation abounds with illustrations of the difficulty on which it is necessary here to insist. Thus the Reform Act 1832 is, in the judgment of most English historians and thinkers, a wise law. It also was at the time of its enactment a popular law. The Whigs probably underrated the amount and the strength of the opposition to the Act raised by Tories, but that the passing of the Reform Act was hailed with general favour is one of the best attested facts of modern history. The Act of Union, passed in 1707, was proved by its results to be one of the wisest acts ever placed on the statute book. It conferred great benefits upon the inhabitants both of England and of Scotland. It created Great Britain and gave to the united country the power to resist in one age the threatened predominance of Louis XIV, and in another age to withstand and overthrow the tremendous power of Napoleon. The complete success of the Act is sufficiently proved by the absence in 1832 of any demand by either Whigs, Tories or Radicals for its repeal. But the Act of Union, when passed, was unpopular in Scotland and did not command any decided popularity among the electors of England. The New Poor Law of 1834 saved the country districts from ruin. Its passing was the wisest and the most patriotic achievement of the Whigs, but the Act itself was unpopular and hated by the country labourers, on whom it conferred the most real benefit. Within 2 years from the passing of the Reform Act, it robbed reformers of a popularity which they had hoped might be lasting. Indeed, the wisdom of legislation has little to do with its popularity. Now, all the ideas which are most dear to constitutional reformers or innovators in 1914 lead to schemes of more or less merit for giving full expression in the matter of legislation to public opinion, i.e. for ensuring that any law passed by Parliament shall be popular, or at lowest not unpopular. But these schemes make in general little provision for increasing the chance that legislation shall also be wise, or in other words that it shall increase the real welfare of the country. The singular superstition embodied in the maxim vox populi vox Dei has experienced in this miscalled scientific age an unexpected revival. This renewed faith in the preeminent wisdom of the people has probably acquired new force from its congeniality with democratic sentiment. May we not conjecture that the new life given to a popular era is in part and indirectly due to the decline in the influence of utilitarianism? Faith in the voice of the people is closely connected with the doctrine of natural rights. This dogma of natural rights was in England contemned and confuted by Bentham and his disciples. The declining influence of the utilitarian school appears therefore to give new strength to this doctrine. People forget that the dogma of natural rights was confuted not only by Benthamites but by powerful thinkers of the 18th and of the 19th century who had no sympathy with utilitarianism. Criticism of each of the four new constitutional ideas. Woman suffrage. The claim for women of the right to vote for members of Parliament, or, as now urged, to be placed in a position of absolute political equality with men, is no new demand. It was made in England before the end of the 18th century, but no systematic or at any rate noticeable movement to obtain for English women the right to vote for members of Parliament can be carried back much earlier than 1866-67, when it was supported in the House of Commons by J.S. Mill. Let my readers consider for a moment first the causes which have added strength to a movement which in 1866 attracted comparatively little public attention, and next the main lines of argument or of feeling which really tell on the one hand with the advocates and on the other with the opponents of the claim to votes for women. The causes. These may be thus summarised. Since the beginning of the 19th century, the number in the United Kingdom of self-supporting and also of unmarried women has greatly increased, and this class has by success in literature as well as in other fields acquired year by year greater influence. In the United Kingdom there exists among the actual population an excess of women over men, and this excess is increased by the emigration of Englishmen to our colonies and elsewhere. The low rate of payment received by women as compared with men for services of any kind in which men and women enter into competition has excited much notice. The spreading belief, or as it used to be considered, the delusion, that wages can be raised by legislation, has naturally suggested the inference that want of a parliamentary vote inflicts severe pecuniary loss upon women. The extension of the power of the state and the enormous outgrowth of social legislation results in the daily enactment of laws which affect the very matters in which every woman has a personal interest. In an era of peace and of social reform, the electors themselves constantly claim the sympathy and the active cooperation of women on behalf of causes which are treated, at any rate by partisans, as raising grave moral or religious controversy. Hence, the agitation in favour of women's suffrage often commends itself to ministers of religion, and notably to the English clergy who believe, whether rightly or not, that the political power of women would practically add to the authority in the political world of the Church of England. These circumstances, and others which may be suggested by the memory or the ingenuity of my readers, are enough to explain the prominence and weight acquired for the movement in favour of giving the parliamentary franchise to women. The main lines of argument. These may be brought under two heads. They are most clearly and briefly exhibited if under each head is stated the argument of the suffragist and the answer or reasoning and reply of the anti-suffragist. First argument. Every citizen, or as the point is generally put, every person who pays taxes under the law of the United Kingdom, is entitled as a matter of right to a vote for a member of Parliament. Hence the obvious conclusion that as every Englishwoman pays taxes under the law of the United Kingdom, every Englishwoman is at any rate prima facie entitled to a vote.